Today, congressional negotiators trying to hammer out another coronavirus relief package, setting a deadline Friday night.
When you put an artificial deadline in place, sometimes that amps up the pressure to get something done. Keep in mind just how long it's going to take to get this bill, a gargantuan bill, into legislative form. Now, the offer from the Trump administration includes extending unemployment benefits at the rate of an extra $400 a month until just before Christmas. That's less than the additional $600, which expired in July. And it appears there's an agreement on evictions. There are some sticking points also on nutrition aid, money for schools, also for state and local governments.
Fox's Chad Pergram. America is listening to Fox News.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch! That's just what we did with our new state-of-the-art mobile banking app as we celebrate 66 years of serving our island communities. It's loaded with a ton of new user-friendly features, including remote deposit capture. It's another way of saying you don't have to come to the bank to go to the bank. And if you want to come to the bank, we're happy to see your smiling face as long as you're wearing a mask. And we don't have long lines. Bank instead of rosebud branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
Top End Pest Control is who you call for all your pest control needs. Got a problem with roaches, ants, spiders, rodents, fleas, ticks, termites? No problem. They do it all. Top End Pest Control is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business and HubZone certified, serving Guam since 2012. Call them today for a quote, 487-5657, or email topendpest@gmail.com. Check them out on Facebook at Top End Pest Control and give them a like. Top End Pest Control for all your pest control needs.
President Trump wants to debate Joe Biden sooner.
President Trump telling Fox and Friends that he's looking forward to his 3 debates in the fall with former Vice President Joe Biden.
What's more important to me is the first debate be moved up so that when people are putting in their first ballot, they're going to know. I mean, there's a vast difference. There's never been 2 candidates or 2 philosophies, let's say, that are more different than what we have.
Meanwhile, the Trump campaign has filed a lawsuit against Nevada over a law aimed at expanding mail-in voting before the November general election, saying the state's changes to election procedures make voter fraud and other ineligible voting inevitable. In Washington, John Decker, Fox News.
In a statement, the Biden campaign saying they will abide by the original debate schedule. The president travels Thursday to swing state Ohio. He'll tour a Whirlpool washing machine factory in Northwest Ohio and attend a fundraiser in the Cleveland area. Joe Biden will not be traveling to Milwaukee this month for a moment he's waited years for.
Organizers of the Democratic National Convention, in a statement, say that Joe Biden and other scheduled speakers will not be going to Milwaukee for the DNC, which was already scaled down to only a few hundred people after consultation with public health officials. We're told that Biden will instead accept the Democratic nomination and deliver a speech from his home state of Delaware. That as both parties have scaled back convention plans amid the coronavirus pandemic. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
The Budget Committee of the City Council in Seattle has passed a series of proposed cuts to the police department's budget, including layoffs and downsizing of units, including the Harbor Patrol, Community Outreach, the SWAT team, and Public Affairs. The Budget Committee chair estimating the cuts would total 41% of the Seattle Police Department's annual budget. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Hafadade, this is Carl from APL Guam. Here at APL, our expertise and extensive network can help you grow your business and reach out to more markets. As a responsible carrier, APL is also committed to a sustainable future. Whether it's protecting the environment or investing our efforts in giving back to the community, our dedicated team in Guam and on the U.S. mainland are here to support you. Call 588-4651 or visit apl.com.
They're back. Any footlong is a $5 footlong when you buy one at regular price. At participating locations, Subway, eat fresh.
FHP Health Center now open longer, later hours for you. Go to the island's best one-stop clinic for all your medical, dental, and vision needs during this COVID-19 pandemic. FHP Health Center operates Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and Sunday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. FHP's Cancer Center, Adult Medicine, Pediatrics, Dental, and Vision departments are open for extended hours and available for appointments. FHP Home Health Department is open to continue care for patients at their home. homes. For appointments, call 646-5825 and press 2. FHP, Our Island, Your Clinic.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 66 years. Tall Tales is also brought to you by Security Title, when you absolutely need confidentiality in your real estate transactions.
Welcome to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the only show on talk radio where common sense is a lot more common. Phone lines are now open at 888-TALK. That's 888-8255. And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I say that every day at the beginning of the program as a tip-off as to where this program goes. Bill of Rights, individual freedom, the United States Constitution. We get into politics, sociology, and other related subjects. First item in the program here today is what's called Zemi Ikotni. NBC has their Meet the Press with Chuck Todd. We have our Zemi Ikotni, which is my backwards bilingual play on words that translates to Meet the Press. Press the meet, meet the press. But I have to tell you that our Meet the Press is a lot better than NBC's, or the cable aspect of NBC, which we refer to as PMSNBC. The Chuck Todd version of Meet the Press would feature Chuck Todd trying to look so sober and convince you that he's very objective and very fair. And he doesn't take sides, and he's not for this party or for that side party, when he's about as Democrat as you can be. On Tall Tales, I don't sit here and look you in the eye and say, I'm completely objective. I don't have any favorites. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have any skin in the game, on and on. When I do, I'll tell you exactly where I'm coming from. Tall Tales is not about what's happening so much as why it's happening. So you're going to get a real big dose of my own evaluations and opinions here on Tall Tales, but I also want to hear from you too. 888-8255, 888-TALK, and you will become a part of the international radio listening audience right here on Tall Tales. If you so desire, you can. We're also on Facebook Live, and you can go to Facebook, and you can post a comment there. And a lot of times I read those comments into the record and make my own pithy comments on yours. Starting out with Zemi Ikotni, we start out with the Daily News, which has not run an editorial for at least 3 months. They usually run boilerplate from either USA Today, excuse me, or Gannett News Service, almost always bashing Donald Trump. Well, today it's Bill Christ and Mark Shriver. You may remember Bill Christ. He's a heart transplant surgeon, former U.S. Senate Majority Leader. And he's talking about child hunger surges as COVID-19 rages in the United States. So, as usual, the editorial is a generic editorial that has little to do with folks on Guam issues, etc., and I've already probably spent more time on it than I should. I go next to the Post, which ordinarily runs some pretty hard-hitting editorials, and the Post has received the coveted Blue Star 211 times to the Daily News 57. But the Post has been in a little bit of a slump lately. They haven't been as hard-hitting as usual. This is what they're talking about today. Leaders still must learn the lessons from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And today is a historical day, is August 6th. On August 6th, 1945, a plane, a B-29 bomber known as the Enola Gay, took off from Tinian and dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, the first use of the atomic bomb in warfare. And 3 days later, another atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The Japanese surrendered on the 15th of August. On this side of the date line, it was the 14th of August on the other side of the date line. A day that used to be celebrated in the mainland. I can remember as a youngster, I remember the first VJ, August 14th, 1945. And for about 10 years after that, we celebrated VJ Day. Nowadays, people think that September 2nd is VJ Day. September 2nd was the day that the the official surrender was signed on the deck of the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Back to the editorial. Just a historical note that today is the 75th anniversary of the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. And the title of the editorial is Leaders Still Must Learn the Lessons from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the 3/4 of a century that have passed since August 6, 1945, atomic bomb attack on Hiroshima, and the second atomic bombing on Nagasaki, Japan, a few days later, many of those who bore witness to the era can still remember the horrors of that war. And each of the 2 days, tens of thousands of lives were reported lost. Tens of thousands more died due to injuries and exposure to the atomic bomb in the subsequent days, years, and even decades. The United States launched those 2 bombs from the island of Tinian, less than an hour's flight from Guam. If you've ever been to Tinian, you can go to Northfield. I don't know what it looks like now, but you could go to Northfield and you could find the 2 excavations in the ground called bomb loading pits that the 2 B-29s were loaded from. I don't know if they're still there. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, carried out by U.S. military to put an end to World War II by forcing the Japan to surrender, followed countless lives lost during campaigns in Guam, Hawaii, the Northern Marianas, and elsewhere in the Asia Pacific, where Japan's imperial forces carried out mass murders. 16 hours after the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, U.S. President Harry S. Truman, in a speech, declared, quote, "The Japanese began the war from the air at Pearl Harbor. They have been repaid many-fold. And the end is not yet. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction to supplement the growing power of our armed forces. In their present form, these bombs are now in production, and even more powerful forms are in development. Over the past decades, Japan has become one of the United States' allies. Still, the threat of nuclear weapons remains. Here on Guam, we stand at the crosshairs of potential nuclear threats from North Korea and even China against the United States. So much so that the Pentagon is sending another land-based missile defense system to Guam. Today, the nuclear arms race threatens to not just put a nation or two to its knees. It threatens the very existence of us all. The doomsday clock has kept on ticking, warned the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which was founded in 1945 by University of Chicago scientists who had helped develop the first atomic weapons that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The advancement in technology complicates the threat. The nuclear arms race today has been further complicated by technology, which makes for the launch of nuclear weapons quicker and their damage much more expansive, the bulletin warns. Humanity continues to face two simultaneous existential dangers: nuclear war and, of course, climate change. Yeah. That kind of tells you everything you need to know about that group. That are compounded by a threat multiplier, a cyber-enabled information warfare that undercuts society's ability to respond. The international security situation is dire, not just because these threats exist, but because world leaders have allowed the international political infrastructure for managing them to erode. Many of our sons and daughters and fathers in the armed forces stand at the front lines, watching at sea, on land and in the air, and in cyberspace for potential threats. There could be great pressure to use nuclear weapons in the future scenarios in which many American service members' lives are at risk, and there is no guarantee that a future U.S. president would follow the law of armed conflict, wrote Catherine McKinney, Scott Sagan, and Alan Weiner in a July 20 opinion on the 75th anniversary bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That is why the United States needs senior military officers who fully understand the law and demand compliance, and presidents who care about law and justice in war. I think I'm more interested in presidents who cares about winning in war, but absent that, we can only hope Hiroshima and Nagasaki will be remembered as lessons by our nation's president and Congress in the event of future wars and in future presidencies. No measure of war escalation should reach a lever that would justify pressing the nuclear button. Now, I got a lot to say about that, but I noticed that I've already got a caller. It's our Carl. I didn't even get through Demi Ekotny, and I've got Carl on the line. Okay, well, he's the most dangerous man in the room, so I better put him on the air. Yeah, there he is with his trench coat and his snap brim hat. The most dangerous man in the room, our Carl.
Hey, Bob.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Thomas Sowell, I keep bringing up because he's just a fountain of so many great thoughts and quotations. He's got a website, tsowell.com, SOWELL, and on that there's all his many opinion pieces, hundreds and hundreds of them are archived, and one of them is titled Hiroshima, and he goes into why it needed to be done and what many people don't understand. Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those bombs took about 100,000 lives, and that's really tragic. It's a bad thing, no doubt. But the Allies had learned a lesson from World War I. We didn't demand unconditional surrender from Germany, and so they were able to regroup and eventually come back. A few short years later, wasn't that long when they came back, fully armed and even more deadly than ever. And the second time, in the lead up to World War II, there were a lot of people who were very pacifist among the intellectual class, and they were advising Roosevelt and Churchill to lay down all our arms, as an example to Hitler and Tojo. And they just had no clue about what we were dealing with. But as we approached the end of World War II, we had learned a bloody lesson, and we had demanded from the Japanese and the Germans But at this point, toward the end, it was the Japanese that we were dealing with. The Germans had already given us unconditional surrender, and we were demanding the same from the Japanese repeatedly, and they were refusing. And the reason why this is important is because we wanted to come in and just completely redo their whole society so they could not possibly build up again. Just end all their possibility of building up arms and coming back even more deadly in the future years. And Japan refused. Even after we dropped the first bomb, they refused. They were totally committed. There were still Japanese in the Imperial Army who were totally committed to fighting. Their emperor had commanded every Japanese, men, women, including children, to fight to the death. And they were training, to fight the invaders with spears, guns, kitchen knives, anything, fight to the death. This was the mentality of Bushido, the warrior mentality, fight to the death. There is no honor in giving up. And the comparison was, I've seen it twice, where it was compared that if you surrounded a battalion of Nazis with artillery where they saw they could not possibly win, they would give up. If you surrounded a small company of Japanese soldiers with artillery and where they saw there was no possibility of victory, they would fight. Many of them, most of them, would fight to the death. And sometimes if they saw some were giving up, they would shoot them. They would kill them because it was considered so dishonorable. So this is what we're facing. And the estimates for the deaths that we would face among Americans and Japanese, because we would have to fight through the entire country, block by block, city by city. American estimates, MacArthur estimated over 1 million people would die. And that might have just been Americans. I don't quite remember. The British, on their side, they were estimating 500,000 would die in the process of taking Japan. So it was a high price to pay, but really, when we look at what could have happened, we saved a lot of lives, including Japanese lives. And so that's the story behind why that decision was made. We wanted absolute unconditional surrender, and they refused over and over and over again. There were even Japanese military who were trying to get into the palace to prevent the emperor from agreeing to, and Tojo from agreeing to surrender. And this was, going on all the way up to the end. I mean, there were people within the Japanese Imperial Army who were totally committed to Bushido, fight to the death. Anyway, a lot of people don't realize that's why it had to be done. To spare lives, we had to do that. It's unfortunate, but that's what we were dealing with. And by the way, the cost for Hitler and Tojo started their invasions of country after country because they both believed that the Americans were weak and soft, and so they believed they were going to win because we were so poorly equipped and so weak that there was no possible way we could possibly defeat them. And so this image of weakness that Hitler and his henchmen and the Imperial Japanese Army had in their minds cost over 70 million lives in World War II.
Okay, Carl. Well, thanks for the history lesson.
All right. Right, yeah, I just wanted to bring out some of the things that people don't see why it had to be done. It was tragic, but there was just no way around it. We tried repeatedly, but that was what finally got unconditional surrender. And Japan has become a peaceful nation and a trading partner with us and the rest of the world, as has Germany. So it's worked out for the benefit of the world. Anyway, Bob, thank you very much.
Okay, Carl. So I just want to go back and do a little bit of maybe a historical revisionism, but let's start out with Tojo. Tojo was the Minister of War, actually the Minister of War, and then the Prime Minister of Japan, up until a very momentous event as far as the Japanese were concerned, and that is the fall of Saipan. When Saipan fell, the Tojo cabinet resigned. Now, I'll come back and explain why in just a minute. I've also got Dr. Poole on the line, okay? So I'll be right back.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile Team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Horizon Properties, doing real estate since 1978. 14 years here on Guam. Call Maria Miller from Horizon Properties at 777-7792.
And now, back to Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie, the one radio show politicians don't want you to listen to. Call now, 888-TALK. That's 888-8255.
So here we are, back on Tall Tales with Dr. Tom Poole. Good afternoon, Dr. Poole.
Good afternoon, Judge. Thank you. I just wanted to call in. I really enjoyed your Carl's comments. I always do. He's such a smart guy, and I never disagree with him, but today I do a little bit. In that I spent most of my adult life believing, like Carl, that the atomic bombs saved, millions of lives because they ended the war and nothing else would have. And Carl was right. That 1 million casualty estimate, that was Allied casualties. That did not include Japanese casualties, which were estimated to be at least 5 times that much. So those bombs, I always thought, saved millions of lives until I attended the Army War College. And they quickly and thoroughly disabused me of that notion and convinced me that what really ended the war was that after the dropping of the first atomic bomb on the 6th, on the 7th, the Soviets started the invasion of northwest China, and they also started invading the northern Japanese islands, and then declared war on Japan on the 8th. And it was that, and there's lots of evidence of the Japanese reaction to that Soviet invasion. And there's essentially no evidence that the Japanese were tremendously impressed by what the bombs had done. And if you think about it, the Japanese, as Carl mentioned, were completely inured to loss and just catastrophic, fantastic losses. They normally expected and were proud of 100% losses or very close to that. On every island, everything, they just always fought to the very last man. And they had lost 5 times as many people in the fire raids of Tokyo alone. And understand we burned out 76 cities in Japan. There's a great book I own called A Torch to the Enemy that details those attacks in all those cities, so there just really wasn't much left. So I don't really think actually that the bombs probably did very much. It's a nice simple answer, but there's just very little evidence supporting that, and a lot of evidence supporting the idea that they did not want to be occupied by the Soviets. They'd already seen a very excellent lesson, what that was like when the Soviets occupied the Eastern territories in Germany. So that's, Carl gave a history lesson. I'm giving another one. Mine's just slightly different.
Oh, very good. I appreciate it. And there are all kinds of different viewpoints on the end of the end of the war with Japan, and certainly that's one. According to my reading, of course, the fact that the Russians and Japanese never fought until the very end of the war was a good strategic decision for the Russians. That meant that they could concentrate their forces on the other side of the country, and also for the Japanese. But there was some hope in Japanese circles that the Russians would step in between the other Western powers and Japan and mediate an end to the war. But of course,
that's correct.
Yeah, but well, of course, once they crossed, I think it was the Amur River in Manchuria, that hope was pretty much dashed.
Well, I think it's fascinating, and there's so many lessons to learn from history. And Santayana said that we either learn the lessons of history or we're doomed to repeat them. And so it troubles me greatly that we're trying to erase so much history when we need to learn from it.
Well, and then we have one of our callers. He's known as Drive-Through Jack, who said something along the line like that. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and a large Coke.
Sounds like Jack. Judge, thanks very much. I'm grateful.
Thanks for calling. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of opining on Japan, World War II, the atomic bomb, etc. But I'm going to come back to this last sentence in this op-ed, in the editorial in the Post today. No measure of war escalation should reach a level that would justify pressing the nuclear button. Okay, so let's go back. Now, as I mentioned before, I talked with Dr. Poole. When Saipan fell in June of 1944, the Tojo cabinet resigned because there was pretty much a realization that it was over for Japan, because as soon as the United States captured Saipan, we could send B-29 bombers to bomb Japanese cities, which is exactly what happened. One of the things that happened was the firebombing of Tokyo. Tokyo is a city that was made out of pretty much wood and paper, and the devastation of dropping napalm on Tokyo was probably a lot greater than dropping an atomic bomb on either Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So that goes back to Dr. Poole's point that, the Japanese probably, it was a horrible thing, but it was not a war ender in itself, given the fact that they'd been through having so many cities firebombed up until that time. And then they did have the code of Bushido. And under the code of Bushido, as our Carl mentioned, much better to be killed in war than surrender. And I just read one of Don Farrell's pieces the other day that the entire country of Japan had embarked on national seppuku. Seppuku is a suicide in the name of honor. So much better to fight right down to the last Japanese than to undergo the shame of surrender. Surrender was the worst possible thing that they could do. And that's an explanation of why the Japanese treated American prisoners so cruelly. They wouldn't have treated the Japanese any better in that situation. So there were some errors along the way, you know, at Potsdam when the United States says we're going to push through for an unconditional surrender. And we didn't get an unconditional surrender. Unconditional surrender would have meant that we would have tried Emperor Hirohito as a war criminal, along with a passel of other Japanese. It was only when, through back channels, the United States made it clear to the Japanese that we would soften up the unconditional surrender to the point where the emperor could stay on the throne, but they'd have to at least come along and say, well, yeah, he's still the emperor, but he's not a god anymore. Now, how you can make people think that way, I don't know, but that's diplomacy for you. So had we not made that statement for unconditional surrender, things might have wrapped up a little bit sooner. Some other things that you'll find out if you study the end of the war, there are geopolitical foreign policy experts who will say that the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not the last bombs of World War II. They were the first bombs of World War III. This was a really good opportunity for the United States to show the Soviet Union what they would be up against if they didn't behave. Another theory was that the United States spent like $1 billion in 1941 dollars, which was a huge pile of money, on developing the atomic bomb, the so-called Manhattan Project. And had the war ended and that bomb would not have been used, there would have been some real splaining to do. Why did you spend all that money for that bomb that arguably could have saved American lives and then you didn't use it? Well, you wanted to give the Japanese a break? So that was another one of the cross currents available. So the people are still debating, you know, whether or not the bomb should have been used, whether the bomb really brought an end to World War II and related subjects. Now, I'm going to come back to the last sentence here in this op-ed piece, the editorial. No measure of war escalation should reach a level that would justify pressing the nuclear button. Real Joe Cruz, just to make it clear, this has nothing to do with Janela.
I see, sir.
This is not this is not the mute button that Janela is so handy with, right? So I read this in context of the whole editorial as being a peacenik approach to international relations. Now, you younger fellas wouldn't remember this, but back in the 50s, there was a strong feeling in some countries, especially in Britain, I'd rather be red than dead. I'd rather give in to the communists than have to go through a nuclear war, because nobody could win a nuclear war. But if you stop and look back at it, from 1945 on down to right now, we've had a lot of wars, mostly a lot of small wars, a few brush fire wars, but it's been about a 75-year period of relative peace compared to what the world was like from 1914 forward. And people who have studied it said that the reason for that was that the world powers at that time, the Soviet Union and the United States, knew that if anybody pressed the button, everybody would be destroyed. And that was the United States defense posture. Mutually assured destruction. You attack us, and we'll fire off our rockets, and we'll send our airplanes, and we'll destroy you. So it was kind of like the scene in The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, except all the guns were loaded, and nobody wanted to shoot. It's unfortunate, but since we have the nuclear weapons, that may be the only way that the world will be a relatively peaceful place. That is that those countries that have the bomb, let it be known, you screw with us, you drop a bomb on us, and we'll drop one right back on you. So saying no measure of war escalation should reach a level that would justify pressing the nuclear button, you read, even if somebody drops one on us, we're not going to push that button. And if we could convince other countries of that, guess what would happen? They'd do it. So I notice I've got Frenchie on the line. I'm glad because yesterday Frenchie took some time to explain to us in this year of postmodernism, an awful lot of people don't realize that there are two forces in the world, good and evil. And if good people don't stand up and defend the good, then guess which side wins? Right, Frenchie?
Yes, Bob, you're absolutely right. That was a problem. Historical facts a little bit. It's kind of interesting because everybody is putting a little grain of salt, and everybody is right and everybody is wrong. You know, after, like you said, the Battle of Saipan and the occupation of the Marianas, it was still 1,500 miles for us to go bomb Japan. So Iwo Jima, which was also a huge Air Force base, that's why we attacked it, the battle is February and March of 1945. And it was very important, like you said, the Air Force needed to get closer to the Japanese island in order to do their campaign of bombing Japan to a dust. And what happened next was, after March, is April to June, is the Battle of Okinawa, which everybody agrees was the most brutal battle on the Pacific theater outside of the retaking of the Manila. And those were very brutal battles. The Battle of Manila is often forgotten, and but it was a tactical mistake from MacArthur, and at the same time it was a strategic victory. There was, people also forget that there was already during World War II a conflict between Truman and the Navy versus MacArthur and the Army, and it was a decision of what to do. MacArthur wanted the Nimitz to attack Taiwan and continue the island hopping. And Nimitz, who was a very good tactician, decided not to do that, even though it cost us a lot of ships during the Battle of Okinawa, because the Japanese were able to fly hundreds of kamikaze flights from northern Taiwan. If you look at the map, it's very close to Okinawa. And those were all part of the decision-making. Definitely there was a concern on the U.S. side and the Allies side that invading the main islands would be extremely costly in manpower and probably would continue destroying Japan even worse than we are already done. The bombing campaign, which was started and intensified, basically did not browbeat the Japanese government or the emperor. And I think Truman, when he decided to use the bomb, it was a threefold type of thing. Number one, he was agreeing a little bit with MacArthur that the communists had to be checked. And Truman didn't trust Stalin, and Stalin had already invaded the Manchukuo area and liberated part of northern China, and was already putting the communists in northern China. And they had started the invasion of the northern island of Sakhalin especially. And that was part of the decision also, was to send a warning to Stalin that we had a weapon he didn't have. Except that what we didn't know is that thanks to the very extensive communist spy ring, the Russians were already producing research to have their own atomic bomb. And that led to the situation we had with a Cold War of mutual deterrence, where we basically agreed that trying to attack the other one would be suicidal. And so it goes back to what you were saying about mutual deterrence through the atomic power, and in a way it has brought to us almost 80 years of peace, albeit sometimes an uncomfortable peace, but basically mutual destruction is such a threat that we rather have small local conflict with people that are backing us one way or another. So having a full blast confrontation between the blocs, and right now the blocs are changing since it's more China being more of a danger than anything else. And China is also a nuclear power, and they have the same problem because we have about 10 times the amount of bombs that they do. So just a little fine-tuning of the issue. As you know, the fog of war is definitely very real, and there was a lot of reason why the Americans wanted to end that fast, and there was already the ongoing conflict, and MacArthur ended up staying in power in Japan until the war in Korea, and his subsequent firing by his nemesis Truman, who was sick and tired of having to bow to MacArthur's kind of Roman emperor style. So it's very interesting. But yeah, that was my little piece of history right there. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you very much, Frenchie. Always glad to have you tune in.
You're welcome. So yeah, we were all kind of right, and at the same time, it's a lot more complicated. As always, it's never either white or black, unless it's good versus evil, but it's a lot of gray areas. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, Frenchie. Yeah, so what I mentioned was there are a lot of different ways of looking at it, and well, the best we can do is consider them all. Of course, we'll never know exactly which one of those theories is correct. Let's take a short break here, and I'll come back to Japan for a few minutes before the big halftime show.
Are you fed up with those long bank lines? Do you wish you had a bank who gave you faster service? Well, by enrolling in Bank Pacific's new mobile app, you don't even need to wait in line. But even if you do want to come down in person, we're more than happy to see your smiling face, as long as you have a mask. Because our service is so good, we don't believe in lines. Because for 66 years, we've been making sure you get the service you deserve. Because where others put branches, we place roots. And we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
You've got a job to do. Having the right equipment for the job is critical, and East West Rental has the exact tools you need. Get it done faster with the right stuff, whether it's landscaping tools, concrete tools, lifts, trucks, lights, generators, trench boxes, welders, tents, tables, and chairs. They're here to help you tackle any project you're working on, big or small. Open Monday to Saturday, 7 to 5, closed Sundays. Find what you're looking for at East West Rental Center in Upper Tumont, or call 646-1463.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Mezcla Chamorro Fusion Bistro. They're open in Hagåtña, ready for dine-in, takeout, and delivery services from Monday through Saturday, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Call them at 479-2652 and get your Mezcla fix today.
All right, so taking all of the historical information that we've just picked up here and asking, well, how do we make use of that information where we are today? And my analysis is this: we don't want to say stuff like this. No measure of war escalation should reach a level that would justify pressing the nuclear button. If China and Russia have a nuclear button, then we got to have one too, and ours needs to be bigger than theirs. It's unfortunate that that's the way things are. It would be much nicer if we could all be friends, have a picnic or something like that, talk about the brotherhood of man, but that has not been human history. So we are where we are, and we are in a situation right here on Guam where we want to make sure that nobody disconnects the wires to that button. I have something else I want to put in the record here. It's an article from Red State, and it's titled "Chinese Ratchet Up Belligerence Over South China Sea in Response to Secretary Pompeo, dividing the Pacific in half." The head of the United States Pacific Command, Admiral Phil Davidson, wants to extend and link the Aegis Ashore missile defense system in Hawaii to a similar system to be deployed in Guam. The Aegis Ashore system is a land-based variant to the Aegis missile defense system first used by the Navy as defensive measure against missile attacks on U.S. naval vessels. The Aegis Ashore system is designed to respond to ballistic missile threats. So there was a story in the paper a couple weeks ago that there is a possibility that an Aegis Ashore system will be installed in Guam, and it's like $1 billion piece of hardware. It's very expensive. Now this article goes on to explain how since the end of World War II, the Pacific has basically been an American lake. This kind of explains the freely associated states that we have had control of most of the Pacific. The Chinese approach to things has been, we've always been the biggest and most powerful country in the world, which is true. Up until 300 or 400 years ago, we had a bad 300 or 400 years, but that's over, and we're back now. And it's time for us to take our rightful place amongst nations. So they're gobbling up the ocean between the shore of China and the first ring, the Philippines and island of Taiwan and those islands. And it's the Chinese idea that, the American sphere of influence should come about as far as Hawaii, and that'd be it, and the rest should belong to them. So when you're talking geopolitics, where you put your weapons, how you deploy them, et cetera, it's kind of like an extremely expensive, very complicated game of chess. And so you could see the United States even talking about moving that Aegis Ashore system to Guam, and installing one on Guam is kind of like queen to pawn 4. It's an important move on the board. So there's one more thing that I want to read from this article here, talking about the partition. Under this partition, the one that I just mentioned, China would dominate all sea and ocean lanes from the South China Sea to Australia and the East China Sea to Hawaii. Within that sphere would be the Philippines, Japan, South Korea, all of Indonesia, Southeast Asia to the Indian Ocean. Guam is mentioned in this article. Guam is really important in this article. Guam lies squarely in the middle of the Eastern Pacific half that that China seeks to control. It hosts major naval and air force assets. Admiral Davidson's suggestion that an Aegis Ashore system be installed in Guam would place another ballistic missile defense system much closer to the Chinese mainland. It would also add to an array of similar systems stretching between Japan, Alaska, Guam, Northern Marianas, and Hawaii. So a major movement on the international chessboard. And one more thing about missile defense, like the THAAD missile defense, the Aegis Ashore missile defense. younger folks probably don't remember Ronald Reagan and his idea of the Star Wars missile defense. Well, if you study up on this kind of stuff, you'd think, well, what's wrong with these missile defense systems? They're just defensive, right? That's why they're called defense. Well, the theory is that if you are engaged in firing missiles, the quick draw wins. It's a classic Ray Tenorio, that if you shoot first, then with your missile defense systems, you have a chance of knocking out the missiles that are fired in retaliation. But if you don't shoot first, you really don't have that much chance. So what looks like a defense posture isn't necessarily so. Now, before I leave this, I have to beat the Sabina Parises of the island to the punch, because there is a group out there who say, again, the United States is crapping on the Chamorro people. They're not here to defend us. They're here to make us a target. And the easy answer to that is it doesn't matter, because it's not the people on this island that countries fight over. It's the island. It's the classic real estate situation. Location, location, location. I'll come back to that a little bit later on, but I have a caller online who really wants to make his mark. Go for it, Mark.
Hey, Bob. So, I think one of the reasons I agree with Dr. Poole part way, but the reason I think they surrendered when they did was because they shamed the Russians in the war that they had in the early 1900s. They basically beat them back.
The Japanese did.
The Japanese did it, and they didn't want to have to, suffer the humiliation. Even though the Russians were there, they didn't want the Russians to get the chance to say, "Oh, we did our part," and carrying on the war. I think that might have been in the back of their heads. So, but the other thing that I wanted to bring up was, Frenchie was right on his how bloody the battles were, but actually the battle for Peleliu had 24% casualties. The battle for Okinawa only had about 20, and Manila only had about 18% casualties. So Peleliu was pretty much the bloodiest battle of the Pacific.
And unfortunately, historians say it was needless. It was more of the MacArthur ego, because MacArthur wanted to make good on his promise of "I shall return" when he left the Philippines, and he was worried that his attempts to reconquer the Philippines would be sabotaged by Japanese aircraft coming from Peleliu, and that's why that battle was fought. Turned out to be unnecessary. Gotta go, Mark. I got the big halftime show coming up.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.
Now there's a deadline. I'm Jack Callahan, Fox News. Congressional negotiators agreeing if they can't reach agreement on a new coronavirus relief package by Friday, they'll break off the talks. A little progress reported on Wednesday.
It's fair to say that Republicans have made far more concessions than Democrats in the room.
That's White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, but Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says they need to think bigger.
To have a skinny little bill to say we'll just pick one or two things and do those and walk away from all the other responsibilities when we are in a deep recession, when we are in a major health crisis, is not living up to our obligations to the American people.
The White House says absent an agreement, the president will take executive actions to stimulate the economy. Voters in Minneapolis will not get to vote on a plan to drastically change the police department Department this November. The city's Charter Review Commission says it needs more time to study the plan. Seattle City Council now considering a measure to cut that city's police funding by more than 40%. President Trump on the campaign trail again today. He'll tour a washing machine factory in Northwest Ohio and then attend a fundraiser in the Cleveland area. The Biden campaign announcing their candidate will not travel to the Democrats' convention.
Joe Biden will now address the nation and accept the Democratic nomination via video from his home state in Delaware. After ongoing consultation with public health officials and experts, the DNC concluded convention speakers should no longer travel to Milwaukee, quote, in order to prevent risking the health of our host community, as well as the convention's production team, security officials, community partners, media, and others necessary to orchestrate the event. Biden's in-person convention speech would have been an opportunity to counter critics who not only claim Biden is hiding from scrutiny, but also who question his cognitive abilities.
Fox's Brian Yennis. America is listening to Fox News.
Mescla opened its doors in 2010 and has been proudly serving the people of Guam for 10 amazing years. In celebration of their 10th anniversary, Mescla will be offering 20% off on all burgers for a limited time only. Terms and conditions apply. Please call them at 646-6295 for more information, or visit them at their Upper Tumon location, right across Kmart. Thank you, Guam, for making Mescla one of your favorite hamburger spots.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch! That's just what we did with our new state-of-the-art mobile banking app as we celebrate 66 years of serving our island communities. It's loaded with a ton of new user-friendly features, including remote deposit capture. It's another way of saying you don't have to come to the bank to go to the bank. And if you want to come to the bank, we're happy to see your smiling face as long as you're wearing a mask. And we don't have long lines. Bank Pacific, Rosebud branches, we place roots, and we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
When will the U.S. and the world be in control of the coronavirus? Dr. Anthony Fauci of the White House Coronavirus Task Force telling Reuters it could be more than a year from now.
I don't know. I hope and feel it's possible that by the time we get through 2021 and go around for another cycle, that we'll have this under control. Is it conceivable that we won't? Of course. I would be unrealistic to say that. Do I think we're going to have a much, much better control one full year from this winter? I think so.
Dr. Fauci also says we don't need another shutdown, but we shouldn't, as he put it, let it rip. A Facebook posting on President Trump's page about the virus has been taken down by the platform.
The post included a clip of the president on Fox and Friends talking about sending kids back to school.
If you look at children are almost, and I would almost say definitely, but almost immune from this disease.
Facebook says this, quote, this video includes false claims that a group of people is immune from COVID-19, which is a violation of our policies around harmful COVID misinformation. The Trump campaign says, quote, the president was stating a fact that children are less susceptible to the coronavirus.
Fox's Shannon Brame reports Twitter also suspending tweets from the Trump campaign for posting a link to that video. The State Department says Russia is using social media, state-funded media, and a loose network of proxy websites to amplify conspiracy theories and misinformation about the coronavirus. More than 2,000 unaccompanied children have been expelled from the U.S. since March under an emergency declaration citing the coronavirus in refusing to provide protection under federal anti-trafficking and asylum laws. Government officials declining to answer questions about those expulsions. I'm Jack Callahan. This is Fox News.
Hofady, this is Kayla from APL Guam. Here at APL, our expertise and extensive network can help you grow your business and reach out to more markets. As a responsible carrier, APL is also committed to a sustainable future, whether it's protecting the environment or investing our efforts in giving back to the community. Our dedicated team in Guam and the U.S. mainland are here to support you. Call 588-4651 or visit apl.com.
Everyone has a busy schedule these days, and sometimes we forget to schedule our routine dental checkup and cleaning. Don't neglect your dental health. Schedule one today with Dr. Robert Yang and his Smile team, conveniently located at the East West Business Center on Marine Drive, Upper Tumon. Call us today at 647-8702 or 3. Again, that's 647-8702 or 647-8703. We make smiles happen.
$5 footlong. Pile high with veggies.
They're back. Any footlong is a $5 footlong when you buy one at regular price. At participating locations, Subway, eat fresh.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 66 years.
Okay, so we refought some of the battles of World War II here during the first half of Tall Tales. We ended the first half with a very fitting barrage of cannon fire. I just add a couple of things in here. Mark mentioned the Japanese and the Russians. When the Japanese kicked the Russians' butts, that would have been in 1904 in the Battle of Tsushima Strait. Russians sailed their fleet all the way around from European waters, and the Japanese beat the Russians. And it's a pretty important battle because the Japanese then figured, well, we can play the same game as the Europeans can, and we can start building our own empire too. And it wasn't long after that that the Japanese colonized both Korea and what we now call Taiwan, and embarked on further colonization efforts, the big C word there, until finally when the Japanese made a deal with the Vichy France government that would allow the Japanese to go into French Indochina and gather rubber and oil and other resources. The United States froze Japanese bank accounts or Japanese assets, and the United States broke off and did other things that really aggravated the Japanese. And according to some of the stuff I read, that's when the Japanese figured that if they were going to have their empire, they had to neutralize the fleets of the United States and Britain in the Pacific. And of course, the way to do that was with a surprise attack. And I think, and we'll just end it there by saying, and the rest is history. Okay, let's see what we've got on the card for this afternoon. We've got the big two. We've got Janela. Janela's up to 77 days. Yeah. Troy versus Janela. It's been 77 days. And Janela has not Janela'd anybody. Tina has gone 31 days without detecting an emergency that was an emergency that would affect the health or safety of the people. Therefore, she has not called the legislature into special session and suspended the requirements for any public hearing. So we're still safe. Tina, of course, is branching out, and she has got us signed up for UNPO, the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization. I can't tell you how happy I am about that. That here we are sitting here on Guam, an unrepresented people. We aren't represented in any important body in the whole world. We can't go to the International Convention of Shriners or, the Boy Scouts or anything like that. We're just completely unrepresented. The only place we could go would be, oh, wait a minute. We have a representative in the House of Representatives of the United States. Not good enough for Tina. Okay, and then next on the card, let me see. Let me just go through the card here so you know what's coming up. I've got next on the card. I've got woke versus free speech. I've got Robert Underwood and Finogi versus America. Gleeman versus Guam Memorial Hospital, the second time around. BOSAP versus the unemployed. Gambling versus Guam. J.W. Moylan versus Earned Media. You know what the W stands for, Real Joe Cruz?
Woke, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got the Republicans versus Little Lulu, Therese Terlahi versus Joe San Augustine, and Gary Schiff versus Talina Nelson. Now, this item on the card here, woke versus free speech, this is the third in my series of homilies here. The first one was called The Woke versus Us. Yesterday, it was gaslighting versus the truth. And the themes that these things pick up is what's going on in our country right now. This gang of neo-Marxists, the Antifa and Black Lives Matter folks, trashing the cities, doing what they can to foment a revolution in the United States, gaslighting us all by making us think that the things that we know are really wrong. Trying to tear down the country, etc. So today I've got an article here from Town Hall called The Woke Chokehold. I don't think I need to do much explaining about that, except when it comes to the chokehold. You know, I'm not going to, it's hard to do an oral piece on it, but the videos of the whole George Floyd incident are now available. And it isn't quite the way it had been marketed by the mainstream media. It's out there. I would advise that you watch it. And according to what I read, George Floyd had a serious heart failure, was probably high on a couple of drugs at the time that he died, and did not suffocate. He died of a heart attack. Now, the anxiety that he was suffering from being in the hands, or actually at the knees of the police officers, may have contributed to that, but if he's being charged with murder, I think it's going to be really hard to make that charge stick. And of course, if it doesn't, if those police officers are not found guilty of murder, then we're going to make the Los Angeles riots look like a bonfire for roasting marshmallows. Okay, the woke chokehold. We can ban police chokeholds in all 50 states, but the pervasive chokehold in America today is the woke chokehold. A majority of Americans feel frozen by fear and are metaphorically choking, overwhelmed by a sense of powerlessness. 62% of Americans are afraid to speak their minds, according to a new Cato poll. America's largest police departments, LA in 1982, New York in 1983, Chicago in 2012, and Minneapolis in 2020, have banned the use of chokeholds by officers. Crime, however, is soaring in these cities. For example, even as the radical Minneapolis City Council works to eliminate police, robberies are up 37%. A chokehold is used to generate submission. We must acknowledge that while the, quote, woke crowd bars police from utilizing the chokehold as a tactical maneuver, they do everything possible to jolt you and me with crushing fear, resulting in our silence and capitulation. Well, I guess the guy who wrote this for Town Hall doesn't listen to tall tales, right, Real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we are not capitulating in silence and fear and crushing fear. What does, quote, woke mean? I had a definition yesterday. Here's another one today. Woke is technically the past participle for the word wake. In American slang, however, woke means an awareness of significant issues related to social justice and race. I wish James W. Moylan would call in and explain his hate crime bill to us. That would be a good example of what woke means. Going on, whips, not words, equals woke is a more accurate definition, because even as you read this article, individual citizens, priests, pastors, small businesses, large businesses, and nonprofits are being bludgeoned into submission by the woke patrol. Whips can be literal, like arson and graffiti on houses of worship, or political, like California Governor Newsom's ban on public worship, even while social distancing. Very often, the, quote, whips employed by America's woke patrol are censorship by social media and search engines. So long as men, quote, so long as men can speak and write freely, so long as there is no censorship, they still have a chance to reform their society to put it on a better road. Author-philosopher Ayn Rand once responded when asked whether it was time for authors, artists, and intellectuals to withdraw their talents from society. Sometimes it feels like we're there at a place of total censorship. We're not yet. Americans are fighting back against defamation and censorship, winning landmark victories that demonstrate to the woke crowd that there is a hefty price to pay for attacking free speech. For example, attorney Lynn Wood recently won a $250 million defamation suit against the Washington Compost for slandering pro-life Trump supporter Covington Catholic High School student Nick Sandman. You remember that one, Real Joe Cruz? Yeah. Wood is now representing Dr. Simone Gold, an emergency physician who lost her job after a video she spearheaded received 14 million views in which she and other doctors spoke positively about hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for the Wuhan virus. The video was censored by Twitter, YouTube, Google, and Facebook. Well, of course, because Trump spoke out in favor of hydroxychloroquine. So anyone who defends hydroxychloroquine is obviously engaged in hate speech. Now, here's the rules for the woke. It's crucial to understand what, quote, woke means in practice, so that you can decide whether you truly want America to go on the woke side. Number one, espouse 100% socialist ideas. 99.9%, not good enough. People of color are not excluded from this rule by the woke patrol, even though Joe Biden says black people who vote for him are the only black people he'll acknowledge. Number two, if you're white, you must disown your whiteness and the whiteness of all other white people without admitting the truth that God loves diversity so much that he created humans of many different colors, including white. Woke is a secular movement without room for God, equality, or brotherly or sisterly love. Number 3, put up a sign that says, all are welcome here, or Black Lives Matter. Don't worry, everyone will interpret these signs to mean that Christians, capitalists, and Trump supporters are not welcome and they do not matter. Wear a mask at all times. Bonus points for goggles. The idea is to look like a bank robber about to dive into a pool. Ignore any medical research to the contrary. 5, call people names instead of engaging them in real dialogue. Colonizer's a really good one, right? Better yet, seize their gun, especially if they exercise their Second Amendment rights, and peacefully defend their private property against violent protesters. Now think of Mark and Patricia McCloskey in St. Louis. Support Big Pharma. Drug company profits are more important than saving lives and eliminating needless suffering from the Wuhan virus through existing drug treatments that cost under $200, like hydroxychloroquine and asthma medication. Number 7, believe everything CNS and MSNBC report. Love everything you see on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. The media loves you and will never censor or slander or lie. Number 8, violence is acceptable to the woke crowd if it advances socialism in America. Come on. As AOC implies, criminals are actually nice people who happen to be hungry and are looking for a loaf of bread. 9, even if ratings drop, professional athletes should kneel, talk, or walk out during the national anthem. Fans don't matter. 10, recognize that guns are for protecting socialist politicians with taxpayer-subsidized armed guards while they dismantle the police. As an example, the $153,000 spent guarding 3 Minneapolis city council members as they vote to abolish the police. So that's what it takes to be woke. And a not unrelated subject, I go to RU versus America, Robert Underwood versus America. And this goes to candidates. I picked it up yesterday, Finogui versus America. Candidates to discuss Chamorro self-determination, decolonization during online forums. And you recall Underwood and Will Castro signed up for it. And Will Castro, Michael San Nicolas didn't go, and I could understand it. You talk about a stacked deck. So, and this is not unusual. Here goes. I'm reading from coverage that the Post did. This is from Underwood. Robert Underwood began by saying that he's for Chamorro self-determination and has always been since the very beginning. That's something that I've been saying myself. And Frenchie, I think, crowned him the guru of the separatist movement. As I've explained so many times, that this Chamorro self-determination gig is really a hoax. And what it is the Chamorro independence movement. Statehood, impossible, practically impossible. Free association, legally impossible, leaving only one alternative, independence, which is too big a mouthful to swallow right now. So the idea is to keep harping on this Chamorro self-determination angle, a classic example of identity politics, and continue to round up supporters, primarily young folks, and do all of this while you're working for the government on the government's nickel. Okay, so Underwood began by saying he's for Chamorro self-determination and has always been since the very beginning. Now, here's a quote. There's two dimensions to this for me. One is there's a legal dimension, and that is that legally the people have a right to determine their future. And this was granted through a series of laws, primarily the Treaty of Paris. Now, if you keep saying something that's not true, if you say it often enough and no smart ass like me comes along and says, hey, wait a minute, that's wrong. After a while, people start to believe it, like this alien races holding in the insular cases that just isn't there, the total distortion of what the insular cases are about. But this is what Robert, again, what he said. The people have the right to determine their future, and this was granted through a series of laws, primarily by the Treaty of Paris. Well, once again, I cheated, and I went and looked up the Treaty of Paris, and here's Article 9, the last sentence of Article 9 of the Treaty of Paris. It says, the civil rights and political status of the native inhabitants of the territories hereby ceded to the United States shall be determined by, guess who? The Congress. 1898. So it says the Congress, civil rights and political status. Congress does it. It doesn't say anything about self-determination or the Chamorro people or anything like that. The civil rights and political status of the native inhabitants of the territories hereby ceded to the United States shall be determined by the Congress. Did the Congress determine the political status and civil rights of the people of Guam? Real Joe Cruz? Yeah. The political status, the native inhabitants of Guam are citizens of the United States at birth. Civil rights? Civil rights are the same as anyone else living anywhere in the 50 states. So, once again, now here's what Robert says. There are two dimensions. Underwood began by saying he's for Chamorro self-determination and has always been since the very beginning. Quote, there's two dimensions to this for me. One, there's a legal dimension, and that is that legally the people have the right to determine their future, and this was granted through a series of laws, primarily by the Treaty of Paris. Now, if this was an editorial, I'd give him a 0, because it's just dead wrong. Now, he's saying this at this Finogi Chamorro, and I suspect, what do you suppose the reaction of the Finogi Chamorro crowd was when Robert said that, Real Joe Cruz?
They cheered.
Hooray for Robert.
Yeah.
He's for the Chamorros. Yeah. Underwood said there's also a moral obligation. And you can see that moral obligation when people start talking about their status as an indigenous people and their status as a colonized people and do other things in line with identity politics. Yeah, I just added that in. When people start talking about it, yeah, that's where if people talk about something, then there's a moral obligation. So if you and I started talking about a wage of $100 an hour for radio personnel at the point, right? If we did it for a little while, they'd have to do it. You know why?
It's a morally obligated.
It's a moral obligation because people are talking about it.
Let's do that, sir.
Yeah, you want to do that?
Yeah, sure. $100 an hour sounds sweet.
Yeah. Let's start out a little bit lower in phase. Let's start out at 90.
I'll take it, sir.
All right. Well, let's break for the 7th inning stretch.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training. Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at GuamTraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Are you fed up with those long bank lines? Do you wish you had a bank who gave you faster service? Well, by enrolling in Bank Pacific's new mobile app, you don't even need to wait in line. But even if you do want to come down in person, we're more than happy to see your smiling face, as long as you have a mask. Because our service is so good, we don't believe in lines. Because for 66 years, we've been making sure you get the service you deserve. Because where others put branches, we place roots. And we're rooting for you. Member FDIC.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Horizon Properties, doing real estate since 1978. 14 years here on Guam. Call Maria Miller from Horizon Properties at 777-7792.
So, seventh inning stretch, Wrigley Field, Chicago. Nobody in the stands, nobody on the field. No Organic Act anywhere in the place. So here we are back in Tall Tales. Robert Underwood said that there's a legal right to self-determination. He found it in the Treaty of Paris. Well, I guess I'd better find out who his optometrist is and see if I could buy a pair of those magic glasses myself, because the Treaty of Paris says the civil rights and political status of the native inhabitants of the territories hereby ceded to the United States shall be determined by Congress. Underwood goes on to say, and in a sense, the Organic Act also acknowledged that it is the Chamorro people for whom the political status is really attached to. I've spent a lot of time reading the Organic Act too. Maybe it's those reading glasses that allowed members of the Supreme Court to find the right of privacy in Griswold versus Connecticut. And then Robert talks about the moral obligations. He says, so there's two dimensions to Chamorro self-determination. There is the moral imperative, because people are talking about it, and there's the legal standing issue, and how that is defined or accepted or refined by every individual human being, by each Chamorro and non-Chamorro on Guam. It is vitally important for understanding the history of Guam. There's also coverage here by the PDN of the same forum, and of course the headline: Delegate candidates urge for Chamorro self-determination. Because there's only one right answer to that question. If you go to this finagle, you have to be for Chamorro self-determination. Otherwise, you don't know you won't know the right answer. That's the only reason that they're doing this, is to have people come in and pander to them. So, and the media does a pretty good job of going along with it too. So here's more Underwood. According to Underwood, now is a crucial time in the United States political landscape that presents an opportunity to pursue the issue of Chamorro self-determination. Quote, the United States is going through, as a country, serious reflection about its relationship to minority groups. Now Robert can show you that he's woke, that he can play the identity politics game right along with the best. He goes on to say, it's, meaning the United States, relationship to historical injustices its relationship to African Americans, meaning like, you know, this is our opportunity to get on that bandwagon called Black Lives Matter. We're facing some upcoming changes. I believe in American national politics that will give us the opportunity to make significant changes. That's why this election is so critical. And then he goes on to say, the Guam delegate can forge coalitions with fellow Congress members. Now, this is really classic. The Guam delegate can forge coalitions with fellow Congress members advocating for the country's underrepresented populations. So there are a lot of people in the Congress who will come up to Robert and say, I'm a member of the United States Congress from the Western District of Texas, and I represent underrepresented populations. A member of Congress representing an underrepresented population? If that's the case, what are you doing there, Congressman? All right, let's see who I got on the line here. I got Mike on the line. Is this our mic? Same, different mic, huh? Okay. Well, you got the mic, Mike.
Hey, Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment on, the Congress thing. Basically, that's just all, it's a facade, so that Guam doesn't cry to the United States about, for example, a taxation without representation kind of thing, which leads up to the discussion about self-determination. Guam will never get it. That's the bottom line. And people may disagree, but for reasons not fully clear, the United States will never give Guam up. Will never give Guam up. And the best way that we can still have Chamorro recognized and still have and preserve the culture, the only way to go, based on my research and education and studies on government, Indian sovereignty is the only way that you can go. That way you still get everything, but the federal government will say you cannot go into Guam and do what you want to these Chamorros. We're going to protect them because they're under the Indian sovereignty type of, political status, if you will, But yeah, self-determination, we're never going to get it. That's the bottom line. And no matter how many Congress people go to the United States, that's just a ways of means to say, treat us fair, but if we don't have a vote on the floor, so we're never going to affect change. So if you can't affect change directly like that, you got to think of other ways. And instead of self-determination, I think Indian sovereignty would be the best way to go.
Let me ask you a few questions, Mike. You mentioned self-determination. If you listen to this program, you'll know that I see those two words as a euphemism. They really have no meaning. So when you say self-determination, do you mean independence?
However, they want to view it in the spectrum, but to me, those type of political status, I guess, it's something that we will not achieve.
Well,
and we're just wasting time and money.
Well, I agree with that, but I've made this point over and over again. There really is only one choice here. Should Guam separate from the United States and be an independent country? Or should Guam maintain its position in the American empire and try to improve its position? Statehood is impractical, and free association is legally impossible. So now let me bring you back here to what do you say? Indian what?
Indian sovereignty. It's similar to an Indian reservation in the United States, the mainland.
I think I know all about it, Mike. I know all about it.
Yeah, and that's the best way. That's the best way to go, and still achieve what you want out of quote unquote self-determination. You can still achieve the same effect. You know.
Let's have a reality check, okay, Mike? I've got the United States Constitution in front of me here, and I'm looking at Article 1, Section 8, which is the enumerated powers of Congress. And it says the Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Now, what that means, Mike, is that every Indian tribe that there is had to have been in existence in 1789. There are new Indian tribes. So if you're not an Indian tribe now, you'll never be an Indian tribe.
Okay, that's correct.
Yeah. So I don't see that saying that Guam should have Indian tribes. I don't see where that gets you. I think it's
well, not tribe, but sovereignty.
Well, again, the Constitution says regulate commerce with foreign nations among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So, and I said I know a lot about this. For one reason, where I went to school, University of New Mexico Law School has a big Indian law center. So you kind of you pick up some of this stuff. But an American Indian, has no special status under an American law. People who are members of tribes that are recognized by the national government have certain privileges that accrue because of membership in that tribe. But as I mentioned, there aren't any new Indian tribes. If you weren't an Indian tribe in 1789, you can't be an Indian tribe now.
Okay, I see your point.
Yeah. So again, Mike, I think the only way to look at this is this. We'd have to have 700,000 people on this island before we'd get up to the threshold where statehood could be considered. That's not going to happen. Free association, the United States would have to negotiate with a sovereign nation for free association, which means independence. Certainly, the United States has the ability to pass a law saying, effective January 1, the United States shall withdraw all sovereignty from the island of Guam. You're on your own, guys. That's what we did with the Philippines on July 4, 1946. So that's an alternative. The other alternative is to work with what we got and make the best of it. Okay.
Yes, we do. We do need to work with what we have, and unfortunately, we can't change it. But you can still generalize it.
Okay.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks for calling. Okay, short break, home stretch, and Frenchie and our Fred are going to be riding with me down the home stretch.
Mezcla Dos opened its doors in 2010 and has been proudly serving the people of Guam for 10 amazing years. In celebration of their 10th anniversary, Mezcla Dos will be offering 20% off on all burgers for a limited time only. Terms and conditions apply. Please call them at 646-6295 for more information, or visit them at their Upper Tumon location, right across Kmart. Thank you, Guam, for making Mezcla Dos one of your favorite hamburger spots.
Top End Pest Control is who you call for all your pest control needs. Got a problem with roaches, ants, spiders, rodents, fleas, ticks, termites? No problem. They do it all. Top End Pest Control is a service-disabled, veteran-owned small business and HubZone certified. Serving Guam since 2012. Call them today for a quote, 487-5657, or email topendpest@gmail.com. Check them out on Facebook at Top End Pest Control and give them a like. Top End Pest Control for all your pest control needs.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 66 years.
Okay, Frenchie, saddle up. You're going to ride the horse here at Churchill Downs down the home stretch. Are you ready to go?
Yeah. I hope I don't get out of breath.
Okay.
Yeah, the Underwood thing, and the Fenogi coalition is kind of a joke, but I think it's a small. I've said it many times. It's a small business venture. It's a cottage industry for Underwood and a few people around him, and they have their narrative. They are the oppressed and so on, and they are basically tax funded either through the feds or through the Guam taxpayers. With all those little things that they're getting. They have UOG as a base and as a bully pulpit, if you wish, and they go on about their business. And in the worst case scenario, I think what Underwood is trying to do is have a coalition that's big enough with enough useful idiots that he can become an arbitrator in the Guam election, which means that any side cannot win without his support. And then he continues his little business there. So here you have two options during the election. You have option A, he wins and he goes to D.C. And then you have two options there too. He goes to D.C. and Trump gets reelected and the Republicans spank the Democrats and he goes nowhere. And he doesn't mind because he's still going to make $175,000 plus benefits for the 2 years. He's going every year of the 2 years is going to be there, and then and so it's all gravy for him. Now, if he wins and the Dems win in November and Crazy Joe is the president, which means that he's just a figure. All the Obama administration operatives are going to come back in, and the far left of the party is going to be demanding changes, and then Underwood, little booby, will be able to go and make alliance with Ilhan Omar and AOC and all the cuckoos of the left wing of the Democratic Party, and he will advance a little bit in his portrayal of being the oppressed people of Guam, and therefore trying to get a few more advantage out of this. But this is how far it goes, because the military, even if the Democrats win, the military is not going to go away. And option B, he loses, and he still has his little cottage industry and a cushy job, and he can continue his politics of division and trying to pull as much out as he can of it. And he'll be in business until he dies. And most likely, he would have a chamorro funeral, and he will be eulogized by all the other useful idiots behind him. So this is what it is, and unfortunately, it doesn't do anything good for Guam, and except bringing more division. He's a divider. He's not a bridge builder. He's nothing. So, and he's lived all his life at the expense of the taxpayer, both federal and local. And that's, he's a joke. And the other joke is the rhino that runs for the GOP, and I cannot believe the GOP let him run. It's unbelievable, But that's what they wanted. This is the old system of Guam politics, and we have to hope that there will be a cleanup. What's his name? The professor at UOG doesn't seem to think. In his column, he was saying that 10 out of the 12 people from this legislature will be reelected. I don't know. People might be pissed enough that it will be like the one Pat 10 issue, and some of the people will be swept away, and maybe some new blood will come in. But this is basically the stakes, and that's what it is. And like Pam Duval called him, You have Beva, blah, 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 and all that group, and that's what they're doing. They are living fairly well and making pretty big salaries out of this charade that they're pushing. So that was my take on that.
As usual, Frenchie, I think you hit the nail right on the head. Thanks a lot for sharing.
You're welcome. I hope we can finish the show with fanfare. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. And next I've got a caller on the line named R. Fred. Good afternoon, R. Fred.
Hi, R. Fred. Sorry.
You're R. Fred.
Hi. I know. Hi, R. Bob. How you doing?
Okay.
So, maybe a couple of callers ago, I just want to kind of shed some light on that, on culture preservation and so forth, and the movement for Chamorro self-determination, and which is AKA independence, kind of from the U.S., which is also means no SNAP benefits, no GURA housing allowances, no federal program dollars, and none of this, I guess, perks that we get from the federal government, as you've confirmed that in previous talks with me. And so the whole talk about, looks like the angle that's being taken is that they want, that we're doing it for Chamorro culture, preservation and promotion, language, and so forth. And I say to that is no one is stopping Chamorro culture from being preserved and promoted, and no one is stopping the language from being promoted and preserved. GVB, CAHA, and any other UOG and any other agency and organization can promote it freely, to the extent where it could be the legal language in Guam.
It is.
The culture, yeah,
it
so
already
it can be
is.
spoken.
Mm-hmm.
I know. So our current status is in no way hindering the progress of culture and language on Guam, of the Chamorro language and culture. It is not being suppressed. The federal government promotes all this and gives actually funding for programs for minorities and for language and cultural preservation. The federal government actually helps us in promoting and preserving it. In no way is it hindering it. So to come off with that angle that we need to, we are suppressed by the federal government in promoting and preserving our culture or language, that's ridiculous.
Well, of course, there's an element of grievance politics here, too. Right. All of the horrible things that the United States did to Guam, 100 years ago.
I know. All the horrible things, yeah. Mm-hmm. They actually saved them from the Japanese.
Right.
From slavery from the Japanese. And they saved us from the slavery of Japanese and instead take care of us now. Who's taking care of us for all these years? And FEMA, let's not forget FEMA when there's a typhoon. Who's helping Guam? Who do we run to? Uncle Sam. I don't get it. Or I get it. The people of Guam need to understand that they're trying to make us confused. We can do everything we want under the U.S. flag. Preserve culture, promote language, speak it everywhere. We have our signage up. We have FEMA. We have federal programs, SNAP, GURA, everything. Commissary, NEX benefits.
You remember, our Fred, yesterday I read that piece about gaslighting.
Yeah.
So the separatists, part of the separatist approach is to gaslight us, to tell us how bad things are, how bad it is to be a Chamorro on Guam.
Well, we know better.
How oppressed the people are.
If we were really that oppressed, why are there more Chamorros going and living in the United States mainland versus here? There's more Chamorros there than here. Why are they going to the suppressive nation to live? right?
Good point, Alfred. Yeah.
Why don't they all come back from that suppressive nation and come to this island?
True enough.
Okay, that's my point.
Okay, Alfred,
nothing else to be said. Thank you.
I got Jimmy and Jim on the line, so thanks
Okay.
for calling, Alfred.
Thank you.
Okay, so I got Jimmy and Jim. I don't know which one. Wow. I don't know.
Can you hear me, Bob?
Is this Jimmy or Jim?
This is Jim.
Okay, Jim. I didn't know if I had Jimmy or Jim or drive-through Jack there for a second. Yeah, I can hear you, Jim.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, we're not doing the drive-through today. We're trying not to do that.
Oh, okay.
You know, Bob, a number of years ago in the CNMI, this exact same scenario and question popped up. And they actually, I don't think it actually, if I remember correctly, it never actually went to a quote-unquote referendum for the people, but that's what they were clamoring for. They wanted a referendum for everybody to be able to vote. And, of course, they followed the exact same rhetoric and the very, very, I call it a sharp-pointed narrative. Oh, they didn't want anyone that wasn't, you know, a true Chamorro to be able to vote on this because, you know, I mean, hey, only true Chamorros should be able to vote on it. And, you know, I'm half caste, okay, so I don't, you know, I may as well just go ahead and call myself an outcast because I don't quote unquote qualify to be a true Chamorro. So they came up with this exact same, you know, rhetoric, and they actually even opened up a line of communication with U.S. immigration about, okay, well, if we want to do this and we want to vote ourselves out of being, you know, part of the United States, you know, how do we do it? What do we do? And the whole thing. And they came back, and I think they were basically told, well, you know, you can approach Congress and, you know, you can try to get this done. But please be aware that when you do this, as Fred just mentioned, you're no longer going to be part of the United States. You're not going to have any of the benefits or privileges of quote-unquote being an American. And you would have to go through immigration, and you would have to, if you wanted to go to Guam to visit your relatives or Hawaii or the West Coast, you would have to apply for and go through the entire visa process because you'll no longer be associated with the United States. You won't even be able to get on a plane and go to Guam and visit relatives or go to, you know, a funeral or whatever without having to do what everybody else in the world has to do that's not a U.S. citizen. And they were like, oh, well, that doesn't sound good, you know. And everybody was like, yeah, hold on, wait a minute. And I'll tell you, at the time, and we're losing our Monamco from that era of our history. The Monamco got mad. Okay, they got mad, and they said, hey, what are you talking about? You don't understand what it's like to be under occupation from someone else. And, of course, they're talking about, you know, the Japanese occupation during World War II.
Hey, James.
And
Jim?
Yes.
Yeah, I got to go. We're right at the end of the program.
Oh, okay.
All
right.
I wish we had more.
Yeah, just to make a long story short, some of these young woke kids need to talk to their grandparents and their great-grandparents if they still.
Okay.
The Point is KUSG, Hagåtña, Guam, 93.3 FM and 104.3 HD3.